Hello, and here we are at Perfectly Paranormal, episode 170. My name's Anna Schmidt, and I'm here every week to share with you true paranormal encounters and information about devils, demons, and dark energy beings that no one else talks about. And before we start today, I have to say that this is my last episode. I am putting Perfectly Paranormal to rest. I have been doing this for 3.5 years now, and my workload with my personal clearings, my paranormal clearings of people's homes and properties is really taking over my life. And I just don't have the time to do all the editing and all the work that comes with my podcast. But I may continue in the future, which means that I will be sharing episodes through my YouTube channel at Paranormal Specialist. So I just want to put out a big paranormal thank you to all of my steadfast paranormal enthusiastic listeners that I've had over the past 3.5 years. It has been absolutely wonderful to be able to share what I've learned about the paranormal with all of you and hopefully give you some insight to help you cope and navigate the paranormal world around us. It really has been a great joy in my life, and I may very well come back and do it again. So on that note, let's get into this episode. And today I have for you some rather heart-wrenching, very personal paranormal experiences shared by Dot, who is an avid podcast listener from my YouTube channel. Now, Dot has one of the most exceptional psychic knowing, intuitive and energetic connections to human spirits and spirits of the animal kingdom that I have ever seen. I have found her experiences that she shared with me absolutely totally fascinating. So Dot writes, "Hello Anna, I've always wanted to share my stories, but I understand that it is a difficult read, and my apologies in advance for sharing some rather what I call brutal events. They deeply upset me, and I tried to see beyond it to make the point that it is crucial to show respect for all life. For most of my life, I've felt out of place around others, making their emotions my own in part, as an unaware, energy-sensitive person. Growing up on a farm made life simple, yet worrisome situations were on the rise, from horrible people causing such turmoil for years on end, to an inevitable turning point. Watching over things, remembering a time over a decade ago when I was walking towards the back of a storage building and I heard a rather distorted, slightly sped up crying that resembled a chicken. Then a sudden knowing came over me exactly where to rescue this sound from, and feeling so compelled, I rushed to the front of the building, unlocked the door, and made my way to the very back, through all the cluttered mess, until I reached an awkward piece of moving equipment. Tipping the equipment up is where I found the dead hen, and shock and sadness set in, thinking as this was some sort of act of carelessness or something sinister thereafter. Now I'm jumping in here. I was thinking about this. I've read this many times, what Dot wrote. I actually have chickens myself, and I know, oh my goodness, chickens can get themselves into very precarious situations. So I do wonder, is that it might not have been anything sinister. It might have been a chicken that went looking for a nice safe place to lay an egg, is that they've got stuck or tangled up in some piece of equipment. It does happen. Then Dot writes, a few months later, one early morning on the way to work, I noticed from the beam of my headlights what resembled a dog running along the road, blurry and kind of semi-transparent, almost gliding across until disappearing unexpectedly. Fear kept me from investigating. Yet I considered the dog had been struck by a vehicle shortly before my arrival. So many share this fate, and my heart bears this sorrow collectively. Dot really does feel for the animals that show themselves to her, Now, was that a residual haunting of a dog that has been possibly hit, and the spirit of the dog is just reliving, going through that loop of where the dog passed away? And Dot says, yet another memory in comparison worth mentioning. Back in 93, while our family was on vacation to many of the UK castles, my mother had taken a couple of photos inside a throne room. And after the vacation was over, and we were all back in the States, she had many rolls of film developed, revealing the strange sight of a king and his two knights. Now, the king was distorted to the point that you could almost make out his face, and the attire that he was wearing was so vibrant. And the two sort of blurry knights were dressed all in black from head to toe, and one stood beside the king as the other guarded the doorway. Now, the second photograph, likely taken a second or two later, revealed nothing but the throne and the wall decorations. And what I found intriguing, says Dot, was that the dog spirit that she'd written about earlier shared the same level of blurriness as the king and the two knights. Now, it became clear that I was desperately in need of answers, and I found relatable connections from a documentary featuring on PBS called Words on the Wind, as well as many of your insightful videos, Anna, along with several answers given to the questions constantly filling my mind. And of course I was a mess, feeling depressed and overwhelmed by it all. I'm going to jump in here. Quite often people who are very psychically open, who sense spirits, whether it be animal spirits, people spirits, their bodies can be overwhelmed by the spirit realm. It's really hard for our bodies to cope with us being in the earth reality without having that intuitive connection to seeing the spirits that are in the earth reality constantly as well. It makes it really hard to be here. And I can relate to what Dot says. So Dot writes, interesting moments stood out in my memory while working outside. I've often heard my name being called without anyone around, and I inexplicably understood that it involved answering phone calls that I'd often missed. Perhaps out of resentment, that awareness came to me, or watching over or directing somehow, and several times I'd felt anxious an hour or so before the phone calls. That knowingness followed me, rather surprisingly, in my daily activities. Even just before a song would play on the radio, I'd recall them from my memory, being too strange to be more than mere coincidence. Now I'm going to jump in here again. Lots of people have these experiences with knowing who's going to ring them. Or I was talking to an elderly friend the other day who hadn't seen someone for maybe 5 years, and all of a sudden that person's name popped into her head. Her and her husband went down the street and there he was. And she was so shocked, and I just had a little chuckle, because that's just how the universe works, is that we are more in tune than what we give ourselves credit for. We expect it to all come in a certain way. We've been trained that psychic powers, you either believe it or you don't believe it, or intuitive stuff is all a bunch of hokum, or it's all, people are skeptical about this stuff. But it's all very real. It's just another level of our energy working on the environment, picking up vibrations, picking up frequencies in the environment. So it happens to lots of people. And then Dot wrote, if I sensed a nagging feeling on the job site, now this is where Dot works, it meant something needed to be adjusted before a negative outcome would present itself. And with this newfound confidence in trusting my intuition came a fine balance to avoid thoughts of grandeur. So she's talking about ego there. Now, oddly enough, there was a moment at work when a piece of metal had dropped from hundreds of feet above and ricocheted off a handrail and then spiraled towards my face. And I suddenly shifted my body out of the way just in time to avoid the flying object. Now, this potentially saved my life. Me jumping in here, this is why we are given these moments of seeing, hearing, feeling, or knowing something that just wasn't there a moment ago. It's an intuitive warning. And then Dodd says, and then a huge advantage as well, while driving in my car, could sometimes feel the intentions of other drivers within sight in both directions. Another time while driving, I noticed a blue signpost that seemed to strangely flash blue and green as I was going a bit too fast. And then she said, a mile down the road, a police officer spotted me, and if I had acknowledged the warning with that sign, I could have avoided the situation of having to pay a ticket. Now, as this is difficult to rationalise, what doesn't quite make sense, but yet sharing it and seeing is believing. Now, Dot says her curiosity led to exploring something that came quite naturally. And she said, taking deep breaths, centering the energy within my chest and directing it upward to sense more, trance-like states would draw my attention. And when the term dowsing was mentioned, I immediately connected. Yet anxiety would grow as I felt my very soul was being pulled in every direction for those animals that were calling out to me in spirit to be heard. My sensitivity was at its highest when truly suffering. Now, I can relate to this. I find that when I do house clearings, the house will show me some of the most traumatic things that have happened in it because the building wants that energy to be cleared. So it will actually give me visual images of what has occurred in the home so that I can understand the energy that needs to be cleared. Because I don't do the clearing work. I ask the archangels to come and do it. But I actually have to verbalize it. So I need to see it first. So I can understand what Dot is saying about the suffering because I see a lot of really traumatic things in people's homes. But it has a benefit. There is the silver lining to it is that the property will be clean and then the people who are living there are going to live more beneficial, energetically cleaner lives. And what Dot writes, I've made a choice to adjust my hormone levels that calmed my mind. But at what price? It felt like I've given up on something too unique just to be numb. Time off from those adjustments. I'd listen to sad music just to feel something again. And in part it worked. I almost wanted to help anyone going through difficult times, and I travelled to do just that a few times. One story I left out about the reasons for wanting peace even more so. While at work 80 miles away, I had vision of a deer stuck on a barbed wire fence, struggling to free itself. And for what seemed like a couple of minutes, I could do nothing but just watch helplessly till the image faded back from wherever it had come. Now, I had no one to call to check on things, nor any way to leave work, but I was certain of what I saw. And when arriving home, I parked the car and just picked up a shovel without hesitation, and I walked to the spot that I had seen in my head. And there I found a young deer hanging on the fence. I struggled to pull the deer free, and as I set it to rest on the ground, I apologised for the delay. And recently, in the same spot, I felt a warning of sorts, and as I looked around, I saw a fawn in the distance with the mother watching in my direction. Now that makes me wonder if that deer that was present was actually connected to those other two deers that showed themselves. I'm not as in tune with the animal kingdom, so I can't really share any information on that, but I just find that fascinating. I love hearing people's paranormal experiences and how they see, feel, sense, and know intuitive information about the animal kingdom. And lastly, Dot writes, mostly writing these stories helps me sort out connections hidden in life and never meant to seem pessimistic, but in attempts to distinguish truth along the way. Always so much more to write about, like dreams of flying, working days in my sleep and repeating them, sleep paralysis, walking distant landscapes, etc. But animal communication would be more my interest. Now, wow. Now, weren't they fascinating insights from Dot? I really do love the fact that she had the courage to share her experiences with such vivid detail. Quite often people who experience paranormal happenings, occurrences, experiences, whatever you want to call them, you do remember them in vivid detail years later, decades later. It's just something that sticks in your mind. And I really want to thank Dot. Thank you, Dot, for sharing your experiences, as I know that many people will be able to relate to your psychic knowing, maybe within themselves or even others around them who share their experiences. And who knows, they may even inspire them to share their own stories without fear of judgment, because that's what it's all about. No judgment and just being able to tell your own truth. So with that, this is the end, for now, of my Perfectly Paranormal Podcast. So thank you very much. Like I said earlier, thank you so much for my listeners who've really enjoyed my content, sent me fan mail messages, sent me their experiences, asked the questions. I've really enjoyed hosting this podcast and having you as my listeners, and it's just been a fabulous 3.5 years. So what more can I say than remember that life is perfectly paranormal.